Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
A Time for True Show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to A Fine for True Show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, and it's a pleasure to have you back again. It's a special space where you can actually find what is going on in our world, the truth, not the public relations, not the propaganda. And tonight we have a very special show for you. In fact, it's from a country where I actually was born, Cuba. I don't know how many realize, but this Dr. Fialkoff, this surgeon of 45 years in New York City, was born in Havana, Cuba in '54. And tonight we're going to discuss my country that in 2026 is facing one of its most severe crises in its history, with inflation soaring and many critical shortages. Tonight, we're very lucky to have with us two special guests who worked for freedom in Cuba, democracy, and we're going to examine the human and economic realities in Cuba, a nation at a crossroads where mere survival is being threatened, where the frustration and hope of the population are colliding. And tonight we have, as one of our guests, and Buddha, let's put his images up on the screen. There we go. Nicolás Gutiérrez Jr., a distinguished attorney, consultant, and civic leader with a long record of influence in law, business, and the Cuban American community. He serves as consultant for the Washington, D.C. law firm Berliner, Corcoran Rowe, and manages Mobile Media Content USA, an international software design firm based in Barcelona. He's president of the National Association of Sugar Mill Owners of Cuba, and also serves as secretary and board member of the Cuban Exile History Museum. He's a man dedicated to service and passion, and was appointed by Jeb Bush to serve 3 terms as the South Florida Water Management District, where he was elected chairman twice. His leadership has earned him numerous honors, recognizing him amongst the top Hispanic leaders in business and law. Also with us tonight, and Buddha, if you put up our next guest pictures, please, is Charlie Nehemiah. And let Buddha, let's engineer, put up his pictures of Charlie. Charlie is an executive director of IntoCuba. There we go. And a longtime advocate for freedom and democratic change in Cuba, with more than 3 decades of involvement in this movement. He has worked directly with organizations such as USAID, Grupo de Apoyo a la Democracia, where he served as public relations director, and Puente de Jóvenes Profesionales Cubanos as its vice president. Let's show his next picture, please, Buddha. And the Institute for Democracy in Cuba, as well as engagements with the U.S. Senate Department's Cuba desk. He was born in New York to a Cuban exile family, and he's traveled extensively across the Cuban island for over 25 years, maintaining deep personal ties with family and communities throughout Cuba. With alongside his civic work, he brings experience in both the precision manufacturing, information technology sectors, and father of 2 sons in the U.S. Army. He has a deep personal mission to one day return to a free Cuba. And Buddha, if you will, let's bring him up live on the screen. And bid a warm welcome to Nick Gutierrez and Charlie Najaime to a Time for Truth show. Welcome.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Ben. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you both. And, Nick, let's start with you. And, you've done so much over the years and really dedicated to humanity. Please tell the audience a little bit about your background and your passion, your mission, please.
Never been to Cuba. I was born in Costa Rica of Cuban parents from Cienfuegos in 1964. I've grown up in the United States. I went to undergrad at University of Miami, law school at Georgetown. And I guess my dad's sort of raised me with an anxiousness about Cuba, and I've devoted a great deal of my professional life as an attorney, as a lobbyist, as a consultant to the Cuban issue. I'm still very much involved. Charlie and I have formed Into Cuba, and we're hoping to guide companies into Cuba as the transition occurs. I think we're here at the threshold of that transition already. I'm the president of the National Association of Sugar Mill Owners of Cuba. That's the group that the families that owned Cuba's pre-Castro sugar mills and had them confiscated. I have worked for the establishment of the rule of law and the systematic restoration of human rights on the island for decades. And I think we feel like we are finally very close to a change in Cuba, a change that would involve new leadership and new hope for Cuba's people that have long suffered under this dictatorship.
Well, you know what? It's a beautiful mission, and I think every human being yearns to have his rights and his freedom. I don't think anyone would really neglect or object to that. I was going to ask you something because I see that Cuba has been facing an agricultural crisis and a problem feeding its population. So what I wanted to ask you, since your family has a long tradition of, agriculture in the sugar industry, once these changes occur, what would you like to see in terms of, let's start with something simple, agriculture, which the community could easily transition to, wouldn't take a lot of training. Tell us a little bit about your ideas, since your family has been involved in that so many years.
Well, Cuba, at the time of the revolution, was the world's leading exporter of sugar. Now it imports sugar, mostly from China. Milton Friedman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, once said that if the communists took over the Sahara Desert, there'd be a shortage of sand in 5 years. In Cuba, we have seen that put into place. The communists have managed to run the sugar industry into the ground. Cuba now produces as much sugar as it did during Spanish colonial times, when it had maybe a quarter of the population that it has today, or less. So, the markets have changed. Cuba would require an import quota of sugar from the United States, like it had in the past, based on its contributions to the Allied war effort in World War II. But the sugar industry can also co-generate electricity, and it can, produce press board products from crushed sugarcane stalks that could help to build housing and furniture, etc. And it could, very importantly, produce ethanol, which is a derivative of sugar, and help Cuba's energy needs in that sense. Many of these sugar mills or sugar mill properties also bordered on the coast, and with beautiful beaches, particularly in the province of Holguin, which have hotels that the Cuban government co-manages with foreign hoteliers. These properties should go back to their legitimate owners, and the legitimate owners should be empowered to decide whether to put them into production, to sell them, to joint venture them, to use them as collateral to borrow against, etc. Cuba had very advanced protections for agricultural and other workers. These protections should be restored, and the sugar cane growers enjoyed a preferential system that where the money that they made by selling their cane to the mills went up with the international price of sugar, but didn't go down. So Cuba had an elaborate social system of legislation, and the 1940 Constitution encapsulated all of this, and it was really a leader among Latin American nations. It even had the per capita gross domestic product of many European nations like Spain and Italy. The communists have managed to destroy all of that in the last 67 years. But the Cuban people have a wonderful entrepreneurial spirit. And as soon as they have a system that unchains their entrepreneurial energies, there's no stopping where Cuba might get. It could be easily like South Korea or like Taiwan in the sense of being a fast-growing economy. Once again.
You know what? You know what, Nick? I don't know if you and I are biased because we were Cuban, citizens, and, we have that warmth, and so does Charlie, for our country. But I'm very biased. I don't know. I feel that Cubans, we have a lot of love. We're tremendously dedicated people. We have tremendous ability to innovate. Look at what we've done with cars there. And I say we because it's really our country. I'm a Cuban-American citizen. But, I feel that Cuba has tremendous potential, like you said. And, Charlie, I wanted to ask you, because I know you've had this heart for a long time. Tell us a little about you, Charlie Nehemiah.
Yes, Doctor, in English, it's ni James, and then in Spanish, it's ni Jaime. So you had it on the Spanish part, but the English, it's Charlie ni James. But quickly, my mother was born in the province of Pinar del Rio in a little farming community called San Luis. My family has always been involved in the tobacco industry. In the 1940s, my uncles got together and purchased about 140 acres of some of the finest tobacco you'll find in Cuba, and we could say the world. They never left the property. When Castro took over, they divided it between the family, so they didn't have too much property. They still live on it, but of course they live like peasants, and there's barely any tobacco industry going on out of Cuba. We're going to change that, though, and we're going to produce some of the finest cigars in the world. My father was of Middle Eastern descent. Years ago in the 1920s, he went to Cuba with his mother and sister and other family members. Cuba was like the waypoint, the way stop we already had family in the United States. A lot of people went to Cuba to get their paperwork to come in legally to the U.S. My father fell in love with Cuba and lived over 30 years in Cuba, did business with a lot of Cuban Lebanese uncles. There was a good little small Lebanese population in Cuba that did very well. My parents left in 1954. My sisters were born in Cuba. I was born in New York. About 30 years ago, something hit me, Doc, and I got this bug, and I was told I have to go to Cuba. Somebody upstairs told me I needed to be involved in Cuba, and I've just, I tell people it's like getting on a Bronco horse. You get on, you ride, you fall off, you get back on. It's been a struggle for 30 years. Nick and I have worked closely together since then. Years ago, I lived in Miami. Nick was the president of the Puente, the Young Cuban Professionals. I was the vice president. We did a lot of functions, cigar nights, and Cuban dances, and educational, cultural events. Then I moved up north to raise my kids, and my two boys are in the Army. I'm back here now working 24/7 on Cuba. Doctor, we are any day from that place changing, and it has to. It is destroyed. For your audience that doesn't really have an idea what's going on, it's almost impossible or hard for us to describe how bad the situation is there now. I mean, we tell everyone, there's no food, there's no water, there's no electricity, but people can't fathom the level of that type of life. And I have a lot of friends and family there. Nick and I talk about we want to help companies go into Cuba when it changes. We want to help rebuild Cuba. By the way, that island has to be rebuilt from scratch. It is destroyed. The highways, the sewer systems, the electrical system. It's unprecedented. Where can we name a country ever. I mean, we rebuilt Berlin after we dropped bombs in World War II. We helped rebuild some of the Japanese cities, but we have to rebuild an entire country of 10 million people. When have we ever done that? But we're gonna do that. Our number one goal, Nick and I, and it's always been number one, freedom and liberty for the Cuban people. That's what we eat, drink, and sleep every day. Once that day comes, we move in. This next project before we do business, humanitarian assistance. We have to get food, water, and medicine throughout that island. The people are suffering. They have nothing. The children have had no milk forever. They take water and they mix sugar in it, and that's what they give the children. After the humanitarian, we're going to move in to help companies establish business. We're going to help rebuild Cuba. It's going to take generations. The place is going to be a disaster the day we walk in, but it's got to be done. It's my passion, and it's very soon. It's very near. Thank you for giving us the opportunity.
You know, Charlie, I think really when you look at it, it's something that's a win-win, because when something doesn't work, you know, I know in my own office as a surgeon, I've got to take a look at things that I do that maybe need to be changed. And, you know, sometimes you have to suck it up. The same thing in sports and life. You know, when things don't work, we got to take a look at it. You got to acknowledge it. You got to get a new game plan. And, you know, we want to win the game of life. This is a game where we're talking about human life, not a sports game, not a dance. And so, you know, let me direct this question to Nick. So, Nick, you know, with what Charlie said, with these blackouts, with his food shortages, with garbage on the streets in this city of Havana, which is insane, you know, how would you describe, Nick, what you feel is the reality on the ground of the Cuban people in present time?
Charlie has said it very well, and I think finally we have a U.S. administration that's willing to do what it needs to do to help the Cuban people achieve their freedom. You know, Cuba has never been nearly as bad as it is now. You know, when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 90s, now with they've lost Venezuela. I mean, everybody inside and outside the island agrees that the problems in Cuba are caused not by the U.S. Embargo with all its humanitarian and agricultural and pharmaceutical exceptions. It's caused by the regime, a regime that's never subjected itself to a democratic election, not even once, a regime that's seized power by force and has kept power by force, a regime that throws 15-year-olds in jail just for marching in the streets on July 7, 2021, calling for liberty. So if the regime is the problem, let's not dance around the edges. Let's not say, you know, which of the regime members can stay and which can leave. The regime has to be ripped out by its roots. It's the problem. Cosmetically touching it up, as they say, putting lipstick on a pig is not going to solve the situation. We need a change of leadership, as our own Cuban American Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said recently. With a change in leadership, everything is possible. The Cuban people are entrepreneurial. We have seen that when they've reached the exile community where they have freedom, they have done well for themselves. Even in Cuba, when small black market openings have existed, they've done well for themselves, causing the regime to shut those down again. The regime might offer illusory reforms. They've done this before. Every time that they're cornered or desperate, that's what they do. Whether it's, well, we're going to compensate some property owners, we're going to let Cuban exiles come back and invest in the property. With who? With the same people who stole all our stuff and killed and jailed our families? No, nothing will occur with this regime. But the new leadership jointly between the island and the exile community is close at hand, and the Cuban people are willing, ready, and able to work hard, shoulder to shoulder, to once again rebuild a country that was a shining light with all of its problems 67 years ago, and will once again be great and show the world what it's all about. Let's make Cuba great again. That's our motto.
Absolutamente. I totally. You know what I was going to say, Charlie? Tell us a little bit about your IntoCuba organization that you and Nick have been partnering on, working on. What is IntoCuba?
Well, first of all, IntoCuba.com is a project I started years ago, and Nick has worked with me on it for a long time. What we want to do, Dr. Ben, is we're going to assist companies. We're going to be facilitators. I mean, people are going to go into Cuba with no idea what's going on. I mean, 90 miles from Key West, 150 from Miami. And, if you think you're going to an established country, foreign country, and you're going to try to establish business as you would normally do with any regular, normal, functioning country. That's not going to be the situation. It is going to be a disaster. Where to stay, where to go. Everything has to be done from new. None of their policies are going to work. And that's where we want to help companies to start their business. But we also have an interest in companies that want to help. And we're talking, we have some preliminary contracts with people where part of our negotiation with them is that we want them to have a stake in helping the Cuban people. We're not looking to bring in companies that just want to make money and leave. That's not our interest. Obviously companies are going to come in there and their bottom line is they've got to make profits, but we want them to care about the Cuban people and assist us with the humanitarian effort. The humanitarian effort is going to be huge in the beginning because the place is destroyed and the people have nothing. But once that happens, again, we want to help companies to rebuild Cuba. Ben, in the beginning when I first go there, and I plan on going to Cuba the day that the U.S. moves in for transition, and the place, there's garbage everywhere. And I've been to Cuba for 25 years, but it's never been this bad. There's garbage everywhere. There's no electricity. I mean, we're going to bang our heads on the ground wondering what we're doing, but we have to do it because we need to help the Cuban people. We have to rebuild that. Let me give you a 2-second, the 24-hour update. Some people under the Cuban regime, under the Castros, are trying to communicate with the U.S., saying that they're ready to negotiate now and they have these ideas. And one of the examples was that they would work on returning stolen property and making compensation if the U.S. was to open relations. But of course, they want the U.S. to pay for all that. We don't want to deal with anyone, any of the Castros, Diaz-Canal, anyone closely associated with the Castro regime. They've been a failure for 65 plus years. There's no way they're going to improve it now. No one's going to back them. No foreign countries are going to back them. They need to get on a plane and leave. Let the U.S. come in there with the exile community. The IMF will come in. The World Bank will come in. We can rebuild that island, but we need the Castro and that regime gone. Now, as in Venezuela, will we have to work with some people in the regime in transition? Yeah, of course. Countries have made that mistake in the past when they take over and they don't work with past governments. So there'll be some people we have to deal with. But as far as the Castros go and the upper echelon of that communist regime, we don't want to say anything to them other than what plane are you getting on and when are you leaving? So, I could talk for days about Cuba. I'm very, emotional and excited, and Cuba means a lot to me. So if I keep going too fast, slow me down. But anyway.
No, absolutely. I mean, you're a man with passion, and you're stating an honest truth. And like I said myself, sometimes I have to take a hard look at what I've done. I think real leaders take a look at what is not working, and the simplicity, which is very powerful, is you got to own up and change it. We're getting near the end of the show, so Mr. Gutierrez, what message would you like to send to all the leaders who are going to watch this show, and in Cuba, Latin America, United States, wherever across the globe? What do you think is really going to be pivotal in this year of 2026?
I think this is our year. This is our moment. Americans are very lucky that they've never had, we've had political turmoil, we've had issues here, but we've never had to live with a totalitarian state. It's unthinkable for Americans that the government would, have monitors in your neighborhood watching what you're doing. Cuba's an island. You can't fish for fish or lobster without turning it into the Committee for the Defense of the Revolution. That's unheard of. Cuba talks about the much ballyhooed U.S. blockade, yet there's shortages of tropical vegetables and tropical fruit in a tropical island. Only the communists would be able to mess things up so badly that a fertile place like Cuba, where food was often thrown away, now people are starving. They have an electrical grid that they haven't invested any money in. We've seen the proceeds from sales of Venezuelan oil sold to China be put in offshore military-controlled bank accounts. We saw more recently Mexico donate humanitarian assistance, specifically canned beans, which somehow showed up in military-controlled stores for resale. The regime has mocked the Cuban people. They have mocked humanitarian countries and organizations that have helped it throughout the year. Where do you think, after a hurricane, the last hurricane that hit Cuba, where did all that assistance end up? Not to the people. The people have nothing. They've been repressed and oppressed every which way from Tuesday. This has to stop. Cubans are not asking for any special treatment. All we want is the same normal situation that other countries enjoy. This is not a left wing or a right wing or a Democrat or a Republican position. This is basic human decency, common sense, democracy, the rule of law. That's what we want and aspire for our people, and we think it's high time that they get it.
Absolutely, Nick.
Free election.
Yes, Charlie, absolutely. And I want to address this last question to Charlie, but I wanted to say something. Is human rights organizations all over, really, like Human Rights Watch, have reported about the ongoing repression. And when you really look at it, Nick and Charlie, it's a God-given right. It's really not, like you said, a political party. God, made man in his image. I don't think he would want anything but all of us to have a free choice to build our lives, to have a humanity on the world, stop these conflicts, get some flourishing and prospering. But before we got to the end of the show, Charlie, tell me, what final statement would you like to give those viewers out there, or those Cubanos mirando, or those whoever they are? Tell me.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Doctor, for having Nick and I on. I hope maybe we can come on again and give more information on Cuba and what's going on. I want to also remind people, info@intocuba.com or director@intocuba.com. Go to our website, intocuba.com, if you want to see what we're doing. Again, there's going to be a lot of humanitarian need and assistance. So if you want to help, if you have contacts in the food and water industry, medicine industry, please reach out to us, because we're working on this now. No, we're excited, Doctor. The change is coming. There's a lot of work ahead of us, and we appreciate that you let us on to get the word out. You talk about the Human Rights Watch. I happened to be at an event last week in Miami for Human Rights Watch, and they still kind of take a different attitude towards what's going on in Cuba than maybe Nick and I take, but we all come from the same point. We want the freedom and rights and people to have life in Cuba. And it's, again, the Americans cannot comprehend how bad the situation in Cuba. I say this, Doctor, the world media is going to go into Cuba when the change comes, and they're going to show the reality of what the Cubans have been going through. And I'm going to want to bang my head against the wall, because this is what we've been telling people for decades. And hopefully they're going to finally see it, not just show the old American cars and the salsa dancing and the beaches, but show the reality of what's going on in the Cuban people. The world will be shocked, but we're going to be there to help. And Viva Cuba Libre.
Well, you know what?
Amen.
Absolutely. Thank you for being on the show. For those of you watching, probably there's going to be some Cuban leaders. If you'd like to contact the channel, a Time for Truth show at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you have some other communications, whatever, to voice. And Nick and Charlie, thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias por lo que están haciendo.
Un
Gracias,
placer,
amigo.
doctor. Patria y vida, que vive la libertad. Cuba needs its inalienable rights.
Exactly. You know what? And I have a postulate here for the next year, an idea. Let Cuba be an example for the world about what mankind, not a race, not a religion, not one faction, what mankind, because Cuba was always like a little United States, or maybe,
Freedom, that's all we want, freedom.
Freedom, microcosm of the United Nations. Let Cuba become an example to the world. I know the Cuban people can do this. We're wonderful people. We're a little biased on this show, but it could happen. And we'll see you on the next episode of A Time for Truth show.
You know what would be a great Doctor,
Great.
you know, it'd
Thank
be a
you.
great idea the next show if we could talk about the changes in Latin and South America that have occurred over the last 2 years, throwing out the leftist governments and how we're getting a more democratic. That'd be a great show
Well,
to talk about next
you
year.
Cuba's
know what?
isolated in the region the first time.
You know what? Here's what we'll do. We can definitely have another show. And again, I want to gear it as a surgeon, as a humanitarian myself. Let's gear it this way. Let's show humanity what the brotherhood of humanity can do. We can destroy the whole world with the technology we have. We can destroy the minds with the AI intelligence. What purpose will we serve if we end up like the movie Matrix? Let's not do that. Let's actually give human rights, respect each other. Let's bring freedom to the people. Let Cuba set that example for the world, and we'll definitely have that show. Nick and Charlie, thank you again.
Absolutely. We'll show the world what freedom can do. All right.
You got it. Have a good night.
All
We'll
right.
see you on the next
All right.
episode
Thank
of
you.
A Time for
Thank-
Truth show. Be well.
All right.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet